And welcome back to our Dance at Court module. I'm bringing this slide again to us as a reminder that we are now looking at performance styles. So, dance styles that are more aligned with there being a clear, with people observing. So when we look at the difference between one of the differences between the social forms and the performance forms, there's a clear line between the performer and the observer. Whereas in a social space, that role can be interchanged easier. I also want to bring up this idea of classical art. And I bring up this idea of classical art because some of the characteristics that you'll see directly align with and with classical with I'm sorry, some of the characteristics of classical art directly align with the characteristics of court dance. So here we go, jumping into that. It's an established art form with a long span of existence. Long is going to be relative depending on that society. Chinese society, some of the civilizations in China have histories that date back several millennia, um, and they have classical dance forms. Whereas in ballet, the while it is a classical dance form, its history is much shorter compared to China, where in ballet, the history is only a few hundreds of years old. This art has been endorsed by powerful forces of society. This parallels the characteristic of classical dance in that classical dance is endorsed by a powerful person in society. Um, Another one, it has a devoted core of performers, patrons, and audience. This core of performers directly parallels the characteristic of the training required to do classical dance forms. I'm sorry. It directly parallels the characteristic of the training required to do court dance. So I'm going to use China as an example as I speak to the area of both classical art and that of court dance because of China's well documented history that is easily accessible to people outside of the country of China. It makes it a great example to stress this point of classical art and that of court dance. Classical dances of China have roots in both the imperial palace, right? So that's our court side, and that of folk dance, that's our vernacular and social dance sides that have been passed down for many generations long period of time. Traditions date back 5 millennia. Um, just to give you an understanding, a century is only 100 years old. So these dance forms date back 5 millennia, remembering that or not remembering, just to share a piece of information with you. Asia as a continent has many different classical dance forms because of that use of documented, easily accessible history. Um, and several of their forms date back millennia, thousands of years, but Asia is not the only place that has documented dance that dates back that long. There's a dance form in southern Africa that dates back 20,000 of years, and it's a medicine dance or a religious dance form. There's also dances of the indigenous tribes of the indigenous nations in Australia that date back many years also. Um, but looking at this time span, so I offer you three different facts about some of the history of China, and I want you to look at those dates and notice that um, these one music and dance look at how music and dance was used in religious ceremonies. We talked about this at the beginning of our semester. Notice how in the Han Dynasty there's a office of music established. And notice when the Tang Dynasty establishes its imperial academy. And I'm saying when because uh, countries change, societies are there, dynasties rise and fall. So these things are going to be established at different times relative to what's going on in society. I use China as an example because within China, we can see the rise and falls of different dynasties. We can see, and because of that, we can see the rise and fall of different events. Your next TED is going to be on Javanese culture and dance as a manifestation of its culture. So some contextual knowledge, that history, the stories around Java, to give you some background knowledge so that you can write a submission that offers the reader some knowledge. It's the fourth largest island in the nation of Indonesia. Its linking of royalty and divinity date back to the 19th century. I bring this up because you'll also see this trend, this trend in our ballet unit when we talk about the use of mythology to link as a direct link of power. So dance at court as a tool of power, used specifically to say at times this family is in power because it was divine that way. There's divine order. The creator, the universe, whatever, put this family in order, put this family in rulership and governance because they are great. Used in several different communities. Now, I also want to note that not all, well, we'll leave it there. So we'll stick with that. Stay at this connection between royalty and divinity in Javanese culture, dating back as far back as the 9th century. But it wasn't until many centuries later, than 1918, that outsiders were privy to court dance. Um, the idea of access to dance is still something that is brought up today, right? Who has access to different dance forms? Who has access to the court? Not everyone in a community, in society, has access to court. That might, to make it relative to the world that we live in right now, not everyone can just walk into the White House. Not everyone can just, so you don't know what's going on there um, unless someone tells you or informs you about it. Not everyone can see the Queen of England or the heir to the throne in other countries. Not everyone has access to the palace and to the things that are happening there. So it wasn't until 1918 that people, outsiders, were privy to what was going on to see court dance. In the 12th century through the 19th century, we also see a shift of power, and that shift having military versus like religious leaders having military in a space of power. But go back to what Jonas said in our first lecture for this module. These dances perpetuate religious beliefs, um, military beliefs, or governance of why this thing is in order. Why should you follow me? Why should you listen to me? So even under the military lead, we're still going to see some dancing. In the 18th century, however, we see a split into two royal courts. The dances depict the battles and divine encounters. So the history, both political, societal, and spiritual, the mythology of this nation. In 1467, we see an invasion that then has a dispersion of court musicians and dancers. Now, why is that important? That's important because a court musician or a dancer is essentially a cultural ambassador. Within your body is the music and the dance, which is directly related to the history of that society. So essentially, you're a living, breathing book. When there's an invasion, um, it is important for these people to leave and to find safety, because sometimes these people are hunted down, and that's because a easy way to get rid of a society is to get rid of its people and to erase its history. So if the artists are the people that keep the history, then you get rid of the art. Um, to give a contemporary analogy to that, if you watch some of your dystopic movies like Hunger Games, and well, not necessarily Hunger Games, but Hunger Games is a dystopic book and show. Um, Handmaid's Tale. If you look at some of these dystopic films, oftentimes there's no art, right? People can't read books, they can't paint, they can't sing, they can't dance, or it's very regimented how they do these things, because within that art is the history. Within that art is inspiration, right? Which is why at court you're inspiring people by reminding them of the ups and downs. So to bring it back, in that invasion, these musicians and these dancers disperse. In 1953, the musicians and the dancers are declared intangible property and historical knowledge, so they're brought back. In this case, it's fortunate that some of these dancers continue to dance and pass it on. So in 1953, the dancers that were alive in 1467 probably were not still alive, unless they are, immortal beings. Um, but if we go back to what was mentioned in the Ashanti court, as a courtesan, as a musician, as a dancer, it is my obligation to pass that information on to another generation. So, fortunately, some of this information was passed on, and can we can still enjoy some of this information, this history, this art now. The dances combine are the cultures that are within Java. Now, they are all Javanese people, but to understand this idea of subcultures, I am Javanese, but I am also, and I am also, and I am also, and I am also, right? So within the Javanese population, you have people that practice Islam, people that practice Hinduism, and people that practice other spiritual practices that relate more to nature. This is all seen in their dance, and they're given credit to having this uh, harmonious way of blending aspects of these cultures into one another. So the dances emphasize discipline via the codified sequences. There's use of geometric shapes that should be repetitive of the characteristics of court dance. There's slow movement with graceful poses. The movement gives off this meditative quality, right? So in the gentleness. So when we're looking at efforts to describe the thing, the the softness, the smoothness. Looking at the dancers, they are more introspective, so reflecting inside what's going on inside of my body and letting that emote into the rest of the world. So it's an inward turn to go outward. The Badaya itself is described as seamless transitions between positions. Now we're looking at these forms because once again, or not once again, we later get into Western performance styles as it relates to the US. And the Western performance styles here, jazz, modern, and hip hop, and even ballet at this point, are very much informed by these other dance forms that we have studied. So I could directly say that the Badaya has seamless transitions between positions, and I will see this in uh, something similar in a company, in a modern dance company, where they use the same kind of principle. It's about the seamless transition between one position to the next. The Badaya specifically is done by 9 dancers. Those 9 dancers represent the openings in the body and also the 9 desires of the human body. In traditional times, or so I was, let's not use the word traditional. In older times, in previous times, when it was originally created, the uh, the dancers were related to the Sultan. Tat number 10 is a video analysis, which means that you're analyzing a video. It is a 2 paragraph submission. That first paragraph, remember, all of your submissions serve the purpose of documenting, describing, and teaching something to the reader. So your first paragraph creates an atmosphere, it creates context, it gives the reader background knowledge, history about the culture in which the dance originated. So in that first paragraph, you're giving them contextual knowledge about Javanese culture and or the Badaya dance. Paragraphs have a 5 sentence minimum. In the second paragraph, this is where you get to describing the dance. So you gave them the background knowledge. Now you're going to describe the dance that happened in the video. This means that you need at least 5, a minimum of 5 base sentences. A base sentence breaks down a singular dance movement and it includes each element of dance in that one sentence. You need 5 of those for this paragraph. In addition to that, you want to have some sentences that connect what you just saw, what you described, back to that culture that it originated from. You did this in your last uh, tat, which was the Ashanti Henny, when you did 5 base sentences and 2 connecting sentences. So you want to use that same kind of format in that second paragraph. Feel free to take a minute and jump into tat number 10. So you could pause right here. I am going to continue forward now and talk about another court. So I talk about a court that is in Europe now. So I'm switching countries. And in the switching of countries and a continent, I am now in ballet. Ballet has a history of several hundred years. It traces its history back to the Italian Renaissance. So during the Italian Renaissance, there was a turn back to uh, Roman mythology and Greek mythology. So there's a turn back to that and the art forms that were manifestations of that mythology in that time period. The art form was then systemized. I am so sorry. The art form was then systemized by King Louis XIV about 100 years later. So we're talking about Italy. Those first 2 bullet points are highlighted because these are things that were mentioned earlier in our course. So Cicero proclaims early on that only men that are drunken or insane dance, but it's okay for slaves to still dance and play at games, right? So where is Rome? It's in Italy. The theatrical dance form of pantomime became popular soon after Cicero's death. Look at when Cicero passed away. It became popular soon after Cicero's death. Excuse me. This is important to note because the pantomime miming gestures, gestures being used in dance. So the pantomime would be like one of the great grandparents to um, earlier to the pre-ballet classics and to ballet that we know now. Pantomime theaters became very popular during the Roman Empire. This was also talked about, but they were not liked by earlier Christians because, in part, because of the stories that they were perpetuating. So, if there's a shift in culture, like if the subculture is a shift to a monotheistic Christian belief system, and you're still practicing these things that were developed prior to Christianity, um, the people that are Christian and are in spaces of rulership are going to have a level of discomfort with that. So during the Italian Renaissance, there's a renewed interest in the classics. It's believed that via the classics, you can take a deeper dive into some of the bigger life questions like what is the meaning of life, and this is you're able to do this via the classics. During this time, we see the secular masquerade and religious processionals that portray this mythology because there is a turn back to it. The Medici family has these parades, and during the parades, people would hang off of the floats and they would chant different things about poetry, and it would end in different dances. All of this is the foundational work for ballet as we know it now. It's kind of like in order to build a building, you have to break down some rocks, right? So this is the stuff that's leading through the way. These elaborate banquets would have a mythological theme, and the nobles would dress up and they would have these, it's like a dinner theater, right? So you go to someone's house and there's this elaborate performance, and the guest, the not the guest, I'm sorry, the host dresses up, and they're putting on this event for you, this pseudo play for you, and one of the characters in the play is a god, and the god or goddess or other divine energies are like, yes, your host is so wonderful and they have all this money and they're so special because of blah 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 and da 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 da. So this idea of showing you that these people are powerful, spectacle as a method for showing you why this family is powerful. In the 16th century, we see these ballettes, these semi-stage use performances, and they're using social dance. So to put it into a contemporary context, if you turn on the radio right now, the dance forms that you would do using those, or the dance movements that you would do, those movements being incorporated into a play is what's happening. Now, once again, I said you just turning on the radio, so these are not air quote trained dancers. These are people just dancing. It's the people at the event dressing up and dancing and having a good time, ideally having a good time. This is not in this space of Italy, and this space of, there were dance instructors, but this is not the the concept of trained dancer the way that you know it now, where as a trained dancer, as a professional dancer, my profession is dancing. um my workday is dancing, versus going to a dance class and learning to be a better dancer. There's a slight difference. So the people at these events did have dance experience, but dance is not their profession. Dance has not become a profession of the people at these events. Catherine Medici brings this tradition with her when she marries and moves to France. So that's why it's from the Italian Renaissance to France, because she brings this tradition with her. So within France and within ballet, a couple of key figures you hear about is Catherine Medici, King Louis XIV, Beauchamp, and Lully. Around 1414, we begin to see in Europe, so in Europe, there begins the dispersion of dance manuals. So the dance steps are written down and they're dispersed through the communities so that people know what's going on. In 1581, so this is later, this is after 1414, of course. In 1581, Catherine Medici has a wedding for her son, and this wedding and this performance takes place at the Louvre. It's this event, this Comique de la Reine, is given credit as being the first air quote ballet. It looks nothing like the ballet that we know now, or it is believed that it looked nothing like ballet as we know it now, but it is referred to as the first ballet because of the definition of ballet being a story that is viewed and experienced via costume design, music, and scenery. So within that definition, this is a ballet, but the movement itself does not look like the movement we know of ballet now. And we'll get into why as we progress through this unit and the next unit. So Louis the 13th was an accomplished dancer, but in 1610 succeeds the throne. At 1610, he succeeds the throne. So Louis the 13th is Louis the 14th's father. So we see that dancing is being done by men, right? So just dance is being done by men. In 1643, Louis the 14th takes the throne, and he's only 4, and he rules from Versailles. So Versailles, Paris is not the place for King Louis XIV to be. He has this elaborate court in Versailles that he rules from. So the Paris Opera and things like that, the Louvre, all of those things are extensions of Louis. King Louis is from the House of Bourbon, yes, like the liquor. And success at his court includes dancing,